A 12-year-old girl with a secret she can't hide. A mother determined to protect her daughter at any cost. A small town divided by a shocking event. One fight for justice that will change everything. Maya Bennett's world was small, but it was her world, and she cherished it. The quiet streets of the town where she lived were lined with worn brick houses and sprawling oak trees. A few blocks from the local school stood the modest, weathered home she shared with her mother, Karen. The house, though small, was filled with warmth and laughter, a stark contrast to the quiet hum of the world outside. Karen Bennett, a woman of quiet strength, worked as a nurse at the local clinic. Life hadn't been easy for her. She had raised Maya alone since the moment she found out she was pregnant at 17. But Karen was determined not to let her past define her or her daughter. She worked tirelessly, and although money was tight, she ensured that Maya never went without. She had big dreams for Maya, dreams of college, a bright future, and a life outside of their small town. Maya, for her part, was a quiet, reserved 12-year-old with a passion for reading. She often escaped into the pages of her books, envisioning a world full of possibilities that seemed just beyond her reach. Maya wasn't like most of her peers. She didn't care for the drama or the social games that consumed the halls of her middle school. She preferred the solace of the library, where she could lose herself in the stories of characters who, like her, longed for something more. Despite the challenges of being raised in a single-parent household, Maya had big dreams. She was determined to make her mother proud and one day leave the small town behind, attending college and becoming the first in her family to graduate. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It was on a warm autumn afternoon after school that Maya first began to suspect something was wrong. She had been feeling tired for weeks, her body weighed down by a fatigue that didn't seem to let up, no matter how much rest she got. She brushed it off at first. Too many late nights studying, she thought. But then there was the nausea. It came and went, a constant reminder that something wasn't quite right. One evening, after a particularly rough day at school, Maya stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her heart racing as she held the small test in her hands. The result was undeniable. The world tilted beneath her feet as she stared at the little pink line that confirmed her worst fear. Maya's mind raced. How would she tell her mother? How could she possibly explain this? Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of the discovery settled over her like a heavy blanket. She couldn't keep it to herself for long. The next evening, she sat down with Karen at the kitchen table, the two of them surrounded by the quiet hum of the evening. Her mother listened carefully, her face unreadable, as Maya explained what had happened. There were no tears, no accusations, just the quiet acceptance that this was now their reality. Karen's voice broke as she assured Maya they would get through this together, no matter what. But just as they were beginning to process the news, things began to unravel quickly. Following Monday, a note was slipped into Maya's locker, an official notice from the school. She had been expelled. The letter was cold, factual, and final. The reason, pregnancy. Maya's heart sank as she read the words. Expelled? She had always been a good student. She didn't deserve this. At first, Maya thought it was some kind of mistake. She hadn't even had time to tell her friends, let alone anyone at school. But when she tried to explain, the response was the same. Pregnancy was a violation of the school's policy, and Maya would no longer be allowed to attend classes. The news spread like wildfire. Whispers filled the hallways as students began to talk, some sympathetic, some cruel. Maya's name became a topic of gossip and judgment, her once quiet existence shattered in an instant. The whispers followed her home too, as Karen began to receive phone calls from the neighbors. Some were supportive, offering help and understanding, while others seemed intent on casting judgment, blaming Maya for what had happened. The town was divided. On one side, there were those who felt sorry for Maya, for the unfairness of it all. On the other, there were those who believed she deserved what happened to her, seeing her pregnancy as a moral failure. And so it was here, in the middle of this turmoil, that Maya's journey truly began. A journey of courage, of defiance, and of fighting for her right to be seen, to be heard, and to reclaim the future she had always dreamed of, no matter the obstacles in her way. Maya sat alone in the corner of her room, the small piece of paper from the school clenched tightly in her hands. Her fingers trembled, and her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Expelled? The word kept echoing in her head, over and over, like a cruel joke that she couldn't escape. She had always been a good student. She had followed the rules, kept her head down, and focused on her future. She never imagined that something like this could happen to her. Her gaze fell to the pink line of the pregnancy test, now hidden in the drawer beneath her desk. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had hoped it was just some strange mistake, but the truth was undeniable. She was pregnant. The school's decision, though, was what hit her the hardest. She had done nothing wrong in their eyes except become pregnant, and that was enough to destroy everything she had worked so hard for. The school, the one place where she had always felt safe, the place where she went to escape her troubles, had just turned its back on her. Maya felt a deep sense of abandonment. It wasn't just the expulsion. It was the way the school treated her like a failure. No sympathy, no chance to explain. She was simply dismissed, like a piece of unwanted trash. Her whole life had been about escaping the cycle of poverty, of proving that she could be more than her circumstances. And now it felt like everything was crumbling around her. The door creaked open, and Karen stepped into the room, her face etched with concern. She had already seen the letter, but now she came to Maya with the look of someone who was ready to fight.
Maya,
Karen said softly, sitting beside her on the bed.
are you okay?
Maya shook her head, the tears finally coming.
How could they do this, Mom? I didn't even get a chance to explain. They just expelled me. I don't know what to do.
Karen's face hardened, a mix of sorrow and fierce anger flashing in her eyes. She knew how much school meant to Maya. It wasn't just about grades for her. It was her escape, her ticket to a better life. To take that away was to take away Maya's future.
Don't worry, sweetie.
Karen said, her voice steady but laced with determination.
We're not letting them do this to you. I'm going to fix this. You deserve better.
Karen immediately began making calls, first to the school, then to a lawyer, and finally to anyone she thought could help. She wasn't the kind of woman who took things lying down, and the injustice of what had just happened sparked something fierce inside her. Her voice grew stronger with each call, demanding that the school explain itself, questioning how they could punish a young girl for something so personal. But the responses were all the same. No exceptions, no leniency. Maya was expelled, and that was final. It didn't take long for word to spread through the small town. In the space of a few hours, the community was divided. Some rallied behind Maya, furious that she was being punished for something that was out of her control. A group of teachers who had always admired Maya's dedication and intelligence began speaking up, offering to help in any way they could.
She deserves her education, no matter what.
One teacher, Ms. Harper, said to anyone who would listen. She had always seen something special in Maya, a quiet brilliance that shone through even on the hardest days. But there were also those who condemned Maya, turning their backs on her.
She got herself into this mess.
One neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, was overheard saying,
She should have thought about the consequences. What kind of message is this sending to our kids?
Maya's own classmates began to take sides as well. Some of her friends stood by her, offering support, while others whispered behind her back, choosing to believe the worst. The girl who had always kept to herself, who had never caused trouble, was suddenly thrust into the center of a scandal that made her feel more isolated than ever. The phone calls continued to come in, and Maya could hear the tension in her mother's voice as she spoke with the school administrators. It was clear that the town was watching, waiting for a response. But for Maya, the noise outside her house was deafening. The judgment, the whispers, the disapproving glares from neighbors who once greeted her with a smile, it all felt like a constant reminder of the weight she was carrying. She wasn't just carrying a child. She was carrying the shame of the town's judgment, the burden of being seen as a failure. As the days passed, Karen's resolve only strengthened. She was no longer just fighting for Maya's education. She was fighting for her dignity, for her right to be treated like any other student. And while the town divided itself into two camps, one that wanted to offer support and one that wanted to condemn her, Maya and Karen stood together, more determined than ever to challenge the system that had failed them. In the face of this sudden, overwhelming adversity, one thing was clear. Maya's life would never be the same, and neither would the town. Karen Bennett had never been one to back down from a fight, especially when it came to protecting her daughter. The school's decision to expel Maya felt like a betrayal of everything Karen had worked so hard for. She had raised Maya to value education, to believe that hard work and determination could help her overcome any obstacle. But now, that very institution had turned its back on her child, punishing her for circumstances she couldn't control. Karen's resolve hardened as she made a decision. She would fight back, no matter how long it took or how much it cost her. Her first step was to contact a lawyer. Late one evening, after finishing her shift at the clinic, Karen sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through a list of local attorneys on her aging laptop. She finally landed on someone who seemed promising, Rachel Porter, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney known for taking on cases involving educational injustices. The next morning, Karen scheduled an appointment. Sitting in Rachel's office a few days later, Karen laid out the details of Maya's expulsion. Rachel listened intently, her brow furrowing as Karen described the school's rigid policies and their complete lack of empathy. When Karen finished, Rachel leaned forward, her voice firm.
This isn't just about your daughter.
She said,
This is about challenging a system that punishes young girls instead of supporting them. If you're willing to fight, I'll fight with you.
Karen's plan quickly took shape. With Rachel's guidance, she began gathering evidence to build their case. They collected school policies, emails, and testimonies from other students and teachers who had witnessed Maya's dedication as a student. Karen worked tirelessly, balancing her long shifts at the clinic with late nights spent poring over documents. The pressure was immense, but she refused to let it break her. Still, Karen couldn't deny that the battle was taking a toll. Bills were piling up, and every spare moment was consumed by the case. At times, she wondered if she had the strength to keep going. It was during one of these low moments that Patricia, Karen's mother and Maya's grandmother, surprised her by stepping in. Patricia Bennett was a woman of old-fashioned values and a sharp tongue. When Karen had become pregnant as a teenager, Patricia had been deeply disappointed. Though she had eventually come around to support Karen, their relationship had always been strained. Patricia had initially been reluctant to involve herself in Maya's situation, believing that it might bring more shame to the family. But as she watched her daughter fight so fiercely for Maya, something inside her shifted. One evening, Patricia showed up at Karen's door with a checkbook in hand.
I've been thinking.
She began, her voice hesitant.
Maybe it's time I did something to help. I can't let you fight this alone.
Karen's eyes filled with tears as Patricia handed her a check to cover the legal fees. But Patricia's involvement didn't stop there. With her connections in the community, she began reaching out to old friends and influential figures, persuading them to support Maya's case. Patricia's change of heart was a turning point for the family. For the first time in years, the three generations of Bennetts began to feel like a team. Patricia's newfound support also gave her a chance to bond with Maya. One afternoon, as the two of them sat on the porch peeling apples for a pie, Patricia spoke up.
You know, Maya,
She said, her voice soft.
when your mother told me she was pregnant with you, I was scared. I didn't know how we'd make it work, but she proved me wrong, and I see the same strength in you.
Maya looked up surprised. It was the first time Patricia had spoken to her with such warmth.
Thanks, Grandma.
She said quietly.
That means a lot.
As the legal battle gained momentum, the town's division grew more pronounced. On one side were those who believed that Maya deserved a second chance. Ms. Harper, one of Maya's favorite teachers, was among them.
Maya is one of the brightest students I've ever had.
She told a local reporter.
She made a mistake, but that doesn't mean we should give up on her.
Others, however, were less forgiving. Mrs. Delaney, a vocal member of the PTA, led a group of parents who opposed Maya's reinstatement.
What kind of message does this send to our kids?
She argued during a heated town hall meeting.
We have to uphold our standards.
The tension reached a boiling point when the local newspaper published an editorial about Maya's case. Written by a young journalist named Ethan Blake, the article called out the school's policy as outdated and harmful.
We should be supporting our students, not ostracizing them.
Ethan wrote. The piece quickly went viral, drawing attention to Maya's story from beyond the small town. As the story gained traction, support began pouring in from unexpected places. An online fundraiser started by one of Maya's classmates raised enough money to cover additional legal expenses. Messages of encouragement flooded in from strangers who had read about Maya's case. One woman, a single mother herself, wrote,
"Your story reminds me of my own. Don't let them break you. You're stronger than they think."
Even more surprising was the reappearance of someone from Karen's past. Michael Carter, Maya's estranged father. Karen had kept her distance from Michael after he left shortly after Maya was born, but when he heard about the legal battle, he reached out.
"I know I've been absent,"
He admitted during an emotional phone call.
"but I want to help. Maya deserves better than this."
Karen was wary at first, but Michael's sincerity seemed genuine. He offered financial support and even attended a court hearing, standing by Karen and Maya for the first time in years. His involvement wasn't without complications. Maya had mixed feelings about his sudden return, but it added another layer of strength to their fight. As the legal battle unfolded, Maya found herself at the center of a growing movement. Her case became a symbol of the need for change, not just in their town, but in schools across the country. The community's conversations began to shift. What started as judgment and gossip slowly turned into dialogue about empathy, support, and the importance of giving young people a chance to succeed despite their mistakes. One afternoon, as Karen and Maya walked through town, a woman stopped them.
"I just wanted to say thank you.
She said, her voice trembling.
My daughter got pregnant last year, and she's been so scared. But seeing what you're doing has given her hope."
Maya's heart swelled. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of pride. Her situation was far from resolved, but knowing that her fight was making a difference gave her the strength to keep going. As the trial date approached, the family prepared for the biggest battle of their lives. Karen, Patricia, and even Michael stood united behind Maya, determined to prove that she deserved her education, her dignity, and her future. And while the outcome was uncertain, one thing was clear. Maya was no longer fighting alone. The days that followed the school's expulsion were some of the hardest of Maya's life. At first, she could barely leave her room, overwhelmed by the constant barrage of thoughts that seemed to swirl around her, every worry louder than the next. She was angry, sad, confused, and above all, afraid. Fear of the future, of the judgment that had already begun to shape the way people saw her. The whispers from her classmates echoed through her mind, their words sharp, their eyes full of pity and judgment. It hurt more than anything she had expected. Maya had always been quiet, a loner by choice, but this felt different. She wasn't just ignored now, she was a spectacle. At school, the isolation grew worse. The same classmates who had once shared lunch periods with her now avoided her. They made excuses not to sit with her, spoke to her only when necessary, and when they did, there was always that strange, uncomfortable distance between them. Maya could see the way they looked at her in the halls, some with pity, some with judgment, and some with a kind of quiet disgust that made her want to shrink into herself. One of her former friends, Emily, stopped by her house one afternoon, and for the briefest moment, Maya felt like maybe things could go back to normal. But when Emily spoke, her words felt heavy with an unspoken disapproval.
"I'm sorry, Maya,
Emily said, her voice faltering.
but I don't think I can be around you right now. I don't know. It's just too much."
The door closed softly behind Emily as Maya stood frozen in the living room, the sting of rejection settling deep in her chest. It wasn't just her peers she was losing. It was a sense of belonging. The life she had known, the life she had dreamed of, was slipping away with every passing day. She was becoming a symbol of something she didn't fully understand yet, a label that others were quick to put on her, but one she wasn't sure how to wear. But amid the darkness, Maya found herself starting to change. She had no choice but to adapt, to find strength in places she hadn't thought to look before. Her mother, Karen, had been her constant source of encouragement, but Maya began to find her own sense of determination as well. Though she no longer attended school in person, she threw herself into online classes, determined to continue her education. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pressure seemed unbearable, when the isolation threatened to drown her. But she kept pushing forward, one lesson at a time, one assignment at a time. There were times when she'd sit in front of her laptop late at night, feeling the weight of everything pressing on her, but she kept her focus on her work. She had always been a diligent student, and now, despite the challenges, the work felt like her only constant. One afternoon, as Maya sat with her laptop, working through a history assignment, she had a moment of clarity. The weight of her situation hadn't fully sunk in yet, but as she read through the textbook, learning about the women's suffrage movement and the fight for equality, something clicked in her mind. She wasn't just going through this alone. There were others like her, young women who had been discarded, judged, and told they weren't enough. But they were fighters. Maya's struggles were real, but they were also a catalyst for something bigger. That night, she began researching teen pregnancy and the stigmas surrounding it. She read about the challenges young mothers faced, not only in terms of the physical and emotional burdens, but in the fight to maintain their dignity in a world that often wrote them off. As she learned, her sense of purpose began to grow. She realized that this fight wasn't just about her. It was about every young woman who had been told she wasn't worthy of respect, every girl whose dreams had been dashed because society couldn't look past her mistakes. Maya's own story, once something she tried to hide, could become the story that sparked change. She began to speak out, starting with her own community. At first, it was small gestures, speaking to others who had gone through similar struggles, participating in online discussions, sharing her story. But soon, Maya found herself writing blog posts, articles, and even speaking at local events organized to support young mothers. She discovered a passion for advocacy that she had never known she had. Maya was no longer just fighting for her education. She was fighting for a platform for all teen mothers, a voice for those who felt silenced. Her mother, Karen, continued to support her every step of the way, always encouraging Maya to speak up, to stand her ground. But it was her grandmother, Patricia, who had the most profound influence on Maya's transformation. Patricia, who had once been a figure of judgment and disappointment in Maya's eyes, began to become her rock in ways Maya never expected. Patricia shared stories from her own past, stories of the struggles she faced as a young woman, of how she had fought for her own place in the world, often against a tide of resistance. She spoke of resilience, of strength in the face of adversity, of how she had learned to stand tall when the world tried to push her down. Slowly, Maya began to see her grandmother not just as a strict, pragmatic figure, but as someone who understood the pain of being underestimated. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, Patricia spoke to Maya in a way she never had before.
You're a lot like me, you know.
Patricia said softly.
When I was your age, I had to make choices that weren't easy. Life didn't give me the luxuries I wanted. But you know what? You learn to fight. You learn to stand up, even when the whole world is against you.
Maya looked at her grandmother, seeing her in a new light. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about fighting for what was rightfully hers. It was about learning to navigate the world on her own terms. And slowly, Maya found that she was doing just that. As the weeks passed, Maya's relationship with her mother and grandmother grew stronger. Karen, who had always been her protector, began to see her daughter in a new light. She was no longer the frightened little girl who had needed protection. She was becoming a young woman with the strength to carve her own path. And Patricia, whose tough love had once felt like a weight, was now the voice of wisdom and resilience that Maya leaned on. Her father, Michael, also began to play a larger role in her life. Initially hesitant and unsure of how to step into the situation, he eventually found his footing. Michael wasn't the most expressive man, but his actions spoke louder than words. He helped with her online lessons, using his love of history to spark engaging conversations that made Maya forget, even if only for a moment, the weight of her circumstances. He also started to attend the town meetings, standing beside Karen and Patricia as they fought for Maya's rights. His quiet presence gave Maya a sense of stability she hadn't realized she needed. Yet despite all the support and growth, Maya still grappled with the overwhelming responsibility of becoming a mother at such a young age. She often found herself lying awake at night, her hand resting on her stomach, reflecting on her future. What would her life look like after the baby was born? Would she ever be able to finish her education? Would she be able to provide the kind of future she had always dreamed of for herself and her child? The questions lingered, always in the back of her mind. But over time, Maya began to realize that the answers didn't matter as much as she once thought. The future was uncertain, and that was okay. What mattered was that she was learning, growing, and finding her voice, both for herself and for the life she was about to bring into the world. She was a young mother, yes, but she was also a fighter, a student, and a woman determined to carve out a future. She wasn't defined by the labels others placed on her, and slowly, she was learning to believe in herself, one step at a time. The courtroom was silent as Judge Larson read the final ruling, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the decision. Maya's heart raced as her family stood beside her, hands clasped together, eyes locked on the judge. Karen, her mother, squeezed Maya's hand, her face a mask of determination and hope. Patricia stood a little farther behind, her arms crossed but her eyes softening with pride. It had been months of legal battles, of constant stress, of defending a truth that Maya herself had only begun to understand. She had the right to an education, and no one, not even the school, could take that away from her.
After reviewing the facts of this case,
Judge Larson continued,
it is clear that the expulsion of Maya Bennett was not only unjust, but discriminatory. It is hereby ruled that the school is required to reinstate the student and amend its policies to prevent such expulsions from occurring in the future. No student should be expelled solely because of pregnancy. This decision will set a legal precedent for the protection of pregnant students' rights.
For a brief moment, Maya couldn't breathe. The weight of those words felt both surreal and overwhelming. The victory wasn't just hers. It was for every young girl who had ever been told she didn't belong in school, who had been cast aside because of a pregnancy that wasn't her fault. As the gavel struck, signaling the official end of the proceedings, Maya felt a rush of emotions flood over her. It was a strange mix of relief, disbelief, and triumph. The months of uncertainty and tension were over. The battle had been long and grueling, but they had won. The injustice that had tried to swallow her whole was finally being righted. Maya, who had once felt invisible in her struggles, now stood in the spotlight, not just for her case, but for the thousands of young women whose stories had gone unheard. The news of the court's decision spread quickly. The phone rang off the hook as journalists and supporters called to congratulate Maya and her family. But despite the praise and attention, Maya's thoughts remained on the journey that had led her here. The struggle, the tears, and the feeling of being judged by everyone around her. The victory, though sweet, was not without its scars. Later that evening, the Bennett family gathered in the living room, the weight of the day's events sinking in as they sat together. The house was quieter than usual, a stark contrast to the celebratory buzz outside. Maya looked at her mother, who was beaming with pride, and her grandmother, whose stern exterior had cracked to reveal a depth of love and support that Maya had never fully understood until now. Karen sat beside her, holding her hand and looking at her daughter with tears in her eyes.
You did it, Maya. I'm so proud of you.
Maya nodded, though her emotions were mixed.
I didn't do it alone.
She said softly, glancing at Patricia.
You both helped me get here. You gave me the strength I needed to keep going.
Patricia, sitting quietly across the room, allowed herself a rare smile.
You've got the strength in you, Maya,
she said, her voice surprisingly gentle.
You just needed to find it.
In that moment, Maya realized how far she had come. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that courtroom months ago. She was stronger, more confident, and clearer about her purpose. The victory wasn't just about her, it was about something bigger. Maya had not only fought for her own future, but had paved the way for other young women like her to have a future. She felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that her fight had made a difference. The community, too, began to change. The ruling sent shockwaves through the town, sparking debates about how pregnant teens were treated and what could be done to support them. The school was forced to revise its policies, implementing new programs and resources for pregnant students, including counseling, academic support, and flexible schedules. The district agreed to create a task force dedicated to ensuring that no student would face expulsion or discrimination because of pregnancy. The shift wasn't immediate. Old attitudes were hard to change, and some people in the town were still resistant to the idea that pregnant teens deserve support. But the legal decision was a turning point. It became a catalyst for conversations about reproductive rights, access to education, and the societal pressures that often made young mothers feel isolated and ashamed. Maya's case had ignited something powerful, something that could not be undone. For Maya, the victory wasn't just a legal win, it was a personal one. She had reclaimed her future, not only for herself, but for every young mother who might one day face the same battle. As she reflected on her journey, Maya understood that her fight had sparked a larger movement, one that might change her town, and perhaps even the world for the better. And in the end, that was the real triumph. It wasn't just about winning a case, it was about changing lives, rewriting the narrative, and giving hope to those who had none. Maya's future was no longer defined by the judgments of others. It was hers to shape, and she would do so with the strength, resilience, and determination that had carried her this far. The first day Maya returned to school was nothing like she had imagined. She had expected whispers, sideways glances, and the awkward silence that often followed her wherever she went. But as she walked through the gates, Maya was met with a different reality. The tension that had once weighed her down had shifted, replaced with something far more unexpected: respect. It was clear that things had changed, not just for Maya, but for the whole community. As she entered the school building, she could feel it. The eyes of her classmates no longer held judgment or pity. Instead, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of her strength. Even some of her former peers, those who had once avoided her, now smiled at her in the hallways. Maya wasn't an outcast anymore. She was a symbol of resilience. Her return wasn't just a victory for her, it was a sign that change was possible, even in a small town. Her teachers, too, had transformed in their approach. Mrs. Harris, Maya's English teacher, who had once been hesitant to acknowledge Maya's struggles, now greeted her with a warm smile.
We missed you, Maya.
She said gently, her voice full of sincerity.
I'm so proud of everything you've done.
Maya smiled back, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't just about the victory in court, it was about the recognition of her humanity. Her teachers had been forced to see her, not just as a teen mother, but as a young woman determined to better her life despite the odds. And for the first time, she felt like her school believed in her potential, just as much as she believed in herself. The support from the administration was also palpable. The principal, Mr. Klein, approached Maya with an offer that she hadn't anticipated.
Maya,
He began, his tone respectful.
we've been talking about ways to better support students in your situation. We'd like you to be involved in a new mentorship program for pregnant students. You've already shown incredible strength and resilience. Your story could really help others.
Maya's heart swelled with pride as she considered the offer. It was the first time her experience had been seen as something valuable, something that could be used to make a difference.
I'd love to.
She replied, a sense of purpose taking root in her heart. Maya wasn't just returning to school, she was becoming an active force in shaping its future. As the weeks passed, Maya found herself immersed in this new role. She worked with the school counselors to create a mentorship program for pregnant students, a resource that would provide support, guidance, and practical advice to young mothers who were facing the same challenges she had. It was a way to give back, to ensure that the next generation of teen mothers wouldn't have to navigate the system alone. Maya began to meet with students who were in similar situations, offering advice, sharing her story, and, most importantly, listening. It was a humbling experience that made Maya realize how far she had come and how much further she could go. Beyond the school walls, Maya's advocacy took on new dimensions. She became a powerful voice for young mothers, speaking at school events, local forums, and even organizing a fundraiser for a community organization that helped pregnant teens. Her story became a beacon for others, showing that teen pregnancy wasn't the end of a young woman's dreams. It was a challenge that could be overcome with determination, support, and love. She spoke passionately about the importance of education, the need for resources, and the power of a community that was willing to change. Despite the challenges she still faced as a young mother, Maya's determination never wavered. There were days when the weight of balancing school and motherhood felt like too much. when the demands of both roles left her exhausted. But in those moments, Maya reminded herself why she was doing it. It wasn't just for her. It was for her child, for other young mothers, and for the future she was determined to build. Her message resonated far beyond the local community. Maya's story began to spark conversations about teen pregnancy, its stigma, and the resources that were so desperately needed for young parents. Slowly but surely, the town began to change. New initiatives were introduced, including daycare programs, counseling services, and academic support tailored specifically for young mothers. The schools were revising their policies to ensure that pregnant students were given the tools they needed to succeed, not just survive, but thrive. Maya's advocacy didn't stop at her town. She became a voice in local media, speaking on behalf of young mothers who had been left in the shadows. Her message was clear. Every teen, regardless of their circumstances, deserved the opportunity to succeed. She wasn't just advocating for herself. She was advocating for a future where no young mother would have to choose between her education and her child. Through it all, Maya continued to grow, not just as a student, but as a mother. Her son Elijah had become the center of her world, and with each passing day, she found herself learning and evolving in ways she hadn't expected. The sleepless nights, the endless feedings, and the moments of self-doubt were all part of the process. But through it all, Maya discovered an inner strength she had never known she had. She embraced motherhood with all its challenges, learning to balance her new life with the one she had left behind. Maya's dreams for the future began to take shape. She still wanted to go to college, to pursue a career that would allow her to help others, especially young mothers. She began researching schools with strong support systems for teen parents, determined to create a life for herself and her family that was full of possibilities. It wasn't going to be easy, but Maya was no stranger to hard work. She had fought for her education before, and now with her son by her side, she was ready to fight for a future that she knew was within her reach. As she sat on the porch one evening, Elijah asleep in her arms, Maya looked out at the horizon. Her journey had been difficult, filled with obstacles and moments of doubt, but it had also been a journey of incredible growth. And in that moment, she realized that she was just getting started. There was so much more she could achieve, not just for herself, but for the community she was helping to transform. Maya's story was no longer just about overcoming the odds. It was about redefining what was possible. And with every step she took toward her future, she was showing the world that the strength of a young mother, the strength of a girl who refused to be defined by her circumstances, was unstoppable. The sun shone brightly over the school field as Maya stood with her classmates, her heart swelling with pride. She held Elijah in her arms, his small, peaceful face resting against her chest. Around her, the familiar faces of her teachers, friends, and family cheered her on. This was the moment she had worked so hard for, graduation day. It wasn't just Maya crossing the stage. It was a victory for every young mother who had been told she wouldn't amount to anything, for every teen who had been made to feel like an outsider. The town, once divided on her journey, now embraced her as a symbol of strength and perseverance. Her story had sparked a change, not only within her community, but within herself. She had risen above the challenges, refusing to be defined by her circumstances. As Maya walked across the stage to accept her diploma, the applause grew louder. Karen, her mother, and Patricia, her grandmother, stood in the crowd, tears in their eyes, beaming with pride. They had been with her every step of the way, from the courtroom to the school halls, and now they watched as Maya took another monumental step toward her future. Maya paused at the end of the stage, her diploma in hand, and looked out at the crowd. She had done it. She had proven to herself and to the world that no challenge was too great to overcome. Elijah wiggled in her arms, his tiny hands reaching up to her face as if to say,
"We did it, Mom."
Maya kissed the top of his head, her heart full. She wasn't just a graduate, she was a mother, a survivor, and a symbol of what was possible when a community truly supports its youth. The ceremony ended, but the journey wasn't over. Maya knew that her education was just beginning. With plans to attend college and pursue a degree that would allow her to continue advocating for young mothers, she was more determined than ever. The road ahead would be challenging, but she had learned that with determination, the right support, and a refusal to give up, Even the most difficult challenges could be overcome. Looking out at the crowd one last time, Maya smiled. She wasn't just looking forward to a brighter future for herself. She was looking forward to creating lasting change for others like her, showing the world that with perseverance and heart, anything was possible.